Hello, everyone joining us. If you don't mind turning off your cameras, if you have cameras on, just to save bandwidth for our presenters, we appreciate it. This should be recording. Okay, excellent. I'm going to get the slides up and running. All right. Slideshow, go. There we go. Someone want to give me a quick thumbs up that they can see the slides and we're good? Excellent. Multiple thumbs up. Cool. All right. Welcome, everybody, to the second panel in our panel series, It Starts at School. I'm actually joining you from Tucson, Arizona, which is why my tank top's in the outside and the birds in the background. So it's nice to see all of you in your sweaters. I'll join you soon, I'm sure, in the cold. We're lucky to have this panel during Sustainable Building Week. It's the third annual Sustainable Building Week, where we're really here to foster collaboration and sustainability across the design disciplines and beyond. I mean, ultimately, we want to educate everyone here. And Sustainable Building Week this year is virtual, so we can reach a lot farther and a lot more people. We have 26 events that you can join us for. You can find those on our website. Thank you to our top sponsors. We could not do this without you. And thank you to our collaborating organizations that have joined us year after year to keep making such dynamic and interesting educational opportunities. For those of you that were unable to join us for part one, I highly recommend it. We had a couple of students join us. I'm just making sure that the chat is okay. All right, we had a couple of students join us and it was fabulous. Here's the recording. I can include that in the follow-up email for this recording as well. This is a joint effort from 3 organizations: the Portland Green Schools Committee, the Committee on Equity, Design, and Inclusion from the AIA, and then Room for More. So I'm the rep from Portland Green Schools, so I'll introduce us, and then I'll pass it on to my co-creators here. The mission of the Portland Green Schools Committee is really to promote sustainability in school design and operations so that we make these places a lot healthier and more productive for students and staff. We have a lot of work to do in Oregon, but we have a lot to do nationwide as well. If you'd like to join us, we just had our October meeting, but we have one coming up here in November. So shoot us an email at greenschoolsportland@gmail.com so that we can include you on next month's meeting invitation. We also have an awesome and stellar social media team. They update weekly, so I highly recommend you follow us on these avenues. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Ed.
Hi, I am Ed Herrera, and I'm an architect at BRIC Architecture, and I'm also one of the co-founders for Room for More. And just to see, as you see here in the slide, we are a collective of architects, engineers, and contractors, builders. And we provide a platform for BIPOC and other marginalized communities within our industry. Thank you.
Sorry, I got stuck on mute. So now I'm going to pass it off to Kelly, who's going to introduce CoEDI. Thank you. Kelly, I think you might be on mute.
Sorry, thank you. I'm Kelly Chinopis. I'm an architect here in Portland with ZGF Architects, and I'm representing the Committee on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, also known as CoEDI. We are a committee of the American Institute of Architects Oregon chapter, which is the professional organization that represents architects both throughout the country and here in Oregon. And we'll be joining the panel in November, so we're excited to be a part of this and listen to today's discussion. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. And I just wanted to remind everyone, we'll have you all stay on mute during the discussion now. We'll have a fireside chat. Actually, we've been calling it lunch table chat, but it's basically a fireside chat at the end where we can have more time to openly discuss and you can ask people questions. So please stay on mute. And if your cameras are on, could you please turn them off? I see a few, so I would really appreciate it just to save some bandwidth for our presenters. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to kick this off. Welcome to part 2, Community Voices. And thank you so much to our moderator, Karina Ruiz. Karina, it's all you.
Thank you, Riley. Thanks for having us. And more importantly, thanks for hosting this conversation It is one that is obviously near and dear to my heart. As principal, one of the founding principles of BRIC architecture, we are a firm that is exclusively dedicated and intentionally dedicated to the design of learning environments. And so that desire to create a more equitable, just, and humane world is one that is sort of in our founding DNA. It's one that I think is grounded by our understanding of what's happening in sort of equity in education or lack thereof. Next slide, Riley. So I figured that as we were having a conversation around educational equity, I mean, I could spend, 30 slides just showing data around the inequity nationally and here in Oregon. What you see in front of you is information from the Department of Education in Oregon that looks at discrepancies. This is based on the 2018-2019 assessments, but state proficiency, which I'm not even going to talk about, the fact that our state as a whole is only at 53% proficient in English language arts and 39% efficient. Oh, I'm sorry, those bottom three should be math. In math, but you also see working your way across that in English language arts, our Black students are 31.3% meeting level 3 or 4 proficiency, which is either meets expectations or exceeds expectations. Our Latino students are 37.2% meeting those benchmarks. And then in math, the numbers drop precipitously. So, while the numbers themselves tell a story, I think the sort of policy level decisions behind that to me tell a bigger story, right? So I don't know how many of you are aware that the folks that plan our prisons, right, for the state nationally, one of the indicators that they use is third grade literacy rates. So they figure if you're not reading proficiently by third grade, you have a greater chance of going to prison than you do of graduating high school. And so that is a very sobering statistic, and if there isn't a call to arms, no pun intended, about achieving equity in education, I think that that to me is always one that stands out. But we have to ask ourselves kind of why, and the answers to that I think are multifaceted. It's about poverty. It's about societal and institutional racism. It's about, as we heard from Amaya and Isaac last week, representation. Next slide, please. As you see here, like the study of educators in Oregon really shows that disparity, right? The inequity that we have, that even though Oregon is not the most ethnically diverse state in the union, the 38% students that we have across the state in public school, I should say, to represent to those students, we only have 10% of the same ethnically diverse representation on the teaching force. So I think Isaac and Amaya did a great job in our last session about sort of the role of representation and of providing mirrors for kids to see themselves, their experiences, their perspectives kind of modeled back to them, both in terms of who's doing that modeling, and then as importantly as to what sources they're citing, right? I remember Amaya specifically saying, like, it was great. I liked learning science from Bill Nye the Science Guy, but I would have really appreciated learning them from about Black scientists or Asian American scientists. So I think for us, that is a huge, that piece of representation matters. And I think it also starts to talk to us as designers, architects, engineers, those of us in the AEC industry, that we can use design both as an outcome and as a process to break the cycle of oppression and intentionally design for equity, right? I was just on a session this morning at the NOMA conference, and they were talking about how we as architects have completely abdicated our role in shaping our world in the way that we want to see it, in a sustainable way, in an equitable way. And we have to stop that abdication. It can't just be when clients ask us for that, but rather we need to be leading them in that direction. And there is no, in my opinion, no greater and more important place to do that than as we design our schools. So that's the context I think that I want to lay before we get into the further discussion. So thank you for that. Next slide. So with that, I want to introduce you to our panelists, or have them introduce themselves. We have Ruwan from PAE, Chandra from Lever Architects, and Gustavo also from PAE. So I'll let them introduce themselves. Go ahead, Ruwan.
Thanks, Karina. Yeah, hi, I'm Ruwan. I'm an associate principal at PAE. And I'm also, though, co-founder of Room for More, along with Ed and Leah, I think, who's on the call, and Gauri. So I'm really representing Room for More. You know, as Ed mentioned, you know, we're a collective that is representing the AEC industry. So I wanted, you know, last session, last panel, I think, you know, we had great student voices and educator voices you know, kind of talking to us about what they see at the school level. We wanted to talk a little bit today, at least, you know, I want to bring forward some of the things that we're seeing at the industry level, at the AEC industry level. So a Room for More, we formed about 5 years ago when, you know, Gauri, Leah, and Ed and I, we just kind of talking about things, and we quickly realized that we were all of the same mindset. It's like we were concerned about the lack of diversity in our professions, in our industry here in Portland. And so we wanted to try to do something about it, and we really wanted to form a group that helped mentor some of the folks that are in our industry. So not only just improve the diversity, but also make the folks that are already here, make them feel more included and inclusive. So one of the initiatives that we've been taking this year is to kind of create a baseline of data on where our industry stands right now in terms of diversity and inclusion. So I want to share a little bit about that with you, and then probably get into a little bit about what we've been talking about in Room for More, what we've been hearing from professionals in the industry. But first of all, you know, to set it off, you know, we did analysis of what just the Portland, you know, demographics, right? We already know that it's not a hugely diverse city, and this is from the census data. You can see the data there, and then on the right is, you know, firm ownership of, you know, minority owned versus non-minority owned. And you can see where we stand there, right? So Riley, if you go to the next slide, we started getting data from our AEC partners. You know, a lot of our partners are just labeled, which, you know, that means they're committing to being transparent in some of the demographic information regarding their companies and so on. We're still starting to put all this data together. So I wanted to share two companies' data with you, just so everybody gets a picture. I mean, it may not be a huge surprise here, but, you know, so this firm number one, and you can see, you know, the all employee diversity, you know, 80% white, and how the other you know, percentages go, right? You know, 1% Black, 1% Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander, 5% Hispanic or Latino. But then when you move into the kind of the management part of it, you know, those numbers become even worse, right? So 86% essentially white, right? So if you go to the next slide, this is another company. We don't have a breakdown quite as well as the other company, but still same type of trends. 83% in as all employees, and then when you get into the diversity in management, it becomes even more stark, right? So not only 5% in non-white. So this is something that we're seeing across most of the firms in Portland, and a lot of the discussion we've had has been about Portland's not a very diverse community to begin with, but we think that's not a fair argument, right? If you look at the Portland demographics and compare that with some of these numbers, especially at the management level, clearly there's an issue. And then, so our next initiative is going to be the inclusivity part of it and where we get that. If you go to the next slide, Riley. This is a graphic that from AIA San Francisco, Equity by Design. You could go to that website to get some of this information, but if you study it a little bit, you'll see, all on the right side, these are the levels of position, right? So you have principal, associate, architect, designer, alternate career. And then on the very left side is, the kind of the demographic information, and then in the middle are these life events, right? Whether you're licensed or not licensed, do you have children? Do you not have children? And you can see how the paths of the different folks depending on where they lie in those the life events, how that affects how they're able to get promoted within the industry. And so it's quite a stark set of data if you really take the time to study it. So Room for More, we're going to try to get some more data here in terms of inclusivity within the Portland market as well. And our goal will be to kind of help improve those numbers over time. Thanks, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ruwan.
Yep.
And this was the last slide that you had. Do you want to talk to it?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about it. I don't want to take out too much time, but this also, it's same data location there from AIA San Francisco, but you can see, the first generation college student, right, is, in terms of white versus other Asian or Hispanic or Black. And I know Gustavo's here. He's going to be talking a little bit more about that as well. So I'll let him speak more about this issue.
Okay. Thank you. I think our next panelist is Chandra. So will you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yeah, I'd love to. My name is Chandra. I'm a project director at Lever Architecture. I've been there for a couple of years now, and being at Lever honestly is kind of the most work that I've done around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm really excited about that. We've really been engaging a lot with a program called Your Street, Your Voice, and so I don't work. The work that I do isn't focused around education typically. But what we have been doing is working with a program where it's really bringing students in and getting them interested in explaining what design for social justice can mean, right? Particularly here in Portland and in neighborhoods that are close to those students. And so what we've been really thinking about, what's really important to me is sort of to create a stronger pipeline of students, because I think that architecture and your success in architecture is all about your network. And as a student, right, you have the network that your parents have. You have the network that is available to you at school, right? And so if you're not wealthy, And if you are a student of color, you don't have the same network as your peers, right? And so that really affects sort of the colleges that you get into and the things that you feel like you might be successful at, and so that you want to pursue them. So really my goal for my work in the DEI realm is to be part of a network for different students, right? To say that you might, join a program and, and be interested in architecture, or maybe not. Maybe you're interested in planning or graphic design, but, how can I connect with those students and help them with their portfolio and talk to them about what it's like in the architecture field, and do sort of internship light kind of things where it's a job shadow, or it's a, how about you come with me to this this fabricator shop and see what what's related to design and architecture that you might be interested in, and just sort of be there as a resource and offer that up, because I feel like that's really the way to get more people of color represented in the AEC industry outside of school. I went to school in Boston, and yes, it was a more diverse place in Portland, but I grew up in Portland. And even then, there weren't really that many people of color in my design program. And so I really, the folks that I met when I was working in Boston were folks who had gone to private schools and who had applied when they were in kindergarten, which was, as a person who grew up in Portland, that was just something I really had no concept of. I thought it sounded totally crazy that you would take a kindergartner somewhere and have them apply and have them evaluated and then send them off to boarding school. It was very foreign, right? And so I just want to make sure that students who are coming from Oregon, have a chance, if that's what they're interested in doing, I want to be able to help them succeed. Even though it's not the design work that I do, it's really important to me to sort of just be part of that network for students.
Wow. Thank you, Chandra.
Yeah.
I think it's important for all of us. So last but certainly not least, we want to give Gustavo a chance to tell us a little bit of his story. His story comes with a video. So I think we decided, Gustavo, that we were going to play the video first. Riley's getting that queued up.
Someone let me know if you can't hear it.
I was born when my mom was 14 here in Woodburn. She was a student at Woodburn High School. She had a hard time. She ended up dropping out. She had to work. My father was working too. When I was about 3 years old, they separated. It was a desperate time. I lived with about 10 to 15 relatives in a 2-bedroom apartment. The food supply at home, we couldn't make enough food for like everyone. Starting in middle school, that's when kids started going into gangs. That's when my peers started using drugs, started drinking. I've had some friends that wanted the attention, they wanted to be someone who they really weren't.
There is gang activity around, and even for students who aren't actively involved, there's a sense of, aligning themselves in some way or another.
It made it hard to have hope. I knew that if I wanted to move out of the conditions I lived on, I had to do something about it. I tried my best. I started learning English. I realized that I could get attention, and it didn't have to be in a bad way. I got the attention at school.
I first met Gustavo 4 years ago, and he stood out immediately. He was very quiet, but he was serious. Gustavo was concerned that he was going to get a top quality education.
I would always be in the advanced group, and that would make me proud of myself. I always try to do my work correctly, trying to be at the top, and teachers would be very supportive, and they would give me attention.
Gustavo's mother instilled that desire, that need, the necessity to for his education.
Today, my mother is first grade teacher at Heritage Elementary here in Woodburn. She graduated from PSU in 2006. I feel very proud of her.
He strives, he works for everything that he does.
At school, I am involved in leadership class. I'm my class vice president.
Gustavo has a 3.9 plus GPA. He will likely be our salutatorian or valedictorian.
1, 2, 3, pull up!
Gustavo's picture appeared in the Woodburn Independent a few weeks ago, and there's an action shot of him. It was on the cover, and I was excited when I saw it, and I handed it to him, and he hadn't seen it, and he was like, oh. He's so modest. He's a role model. He's someone that other students will listen to. He has that power, that ability to work with other people and help them, inspire them.
I want to major in engineering. I want to come back, talk to students from here, how to be dressed up in a suit. I want them to see someone like them, and I want to show them that if I could make it, they too could make it.
Wow. So thank you, first of all, Gustavo, for being willing to share such a deeply personal story. And tell us a little bit more about kind of not only your story up to this point, but then kind of where it went after the video was shot.
Hey everyone, I'm Gustavo. I usually hesitate to share this video. You'll probably know why, but over the years I've just I've accepted kind of the responsibility that we all have. I think we all have unique stories, but there is always overlapping experiences. And so like when I look outside of my window and I see the youth growing up in this community, I know that there are a lot of experiences that mirror my own. And so I've slowly just try to, you know, be present in the community and the life of other youth that can see themselves in me. So that's been huge, and that's kind of the main reason why I've chosen to just, you know, make part of my story visible today, and also, you know, in any other opportunity where I think it can make a difference for students. So that was quite a bit of years ago. But yeah, when I graduated from high school, I focused a lot on scholarships because my parents were not going to be able to pay for school, and I earned a couple full ride scholarships. I ended up going to George Fox University as an ACSIC scholar and studied engineering there. Graduated in 2013, and then I got to go to my dream school. I spent 2 years at Stanford, and I got a master's degree there. So that was a blast, and just really happy to have been able to do that. And then moved back here. You know, I'm here in Woodburn. I spent the last couple of years in Seattle. My wife was doing grad school at UW. But we've always been committed to our community, and that's the reason why we're back here today. So yeah, just thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Gustavo. As a Cal alumni, I'm going to try and get over the Stanford reference, but I guess I'll welcome you to the panel nonetheless. So thank you, everybody. Will you advance to the next slide, please? Because otherwise it's going to do that. It's going to want to start. So really, I think our goal today is just to have a conversation, right? We're going to start the conversation with the panel, but we invite you to join us in the chat and post any questions that you have. Riley, if you will kind of keep an eye on the chat, keep us aware of anything that's happening there. I'll try and monitor it myself, but start by asking.
You got
really,
it. I'm on it.
Thank you. Asking the three of you to really talk about I mean, some of you have kind of hinted at it, but maybe more directly and specifically address some of the inequities and lack thereof of diversity that you're seeing in the AEC fields currently in Portland.
Well, Karina, I can start, I suppose. Yeah, you know, like I said, we've started Room for More because of this issue. And I think it is improving. So I don't want to paint this picture as a dire picture or anything like that. And I think the conversation has been moving forward. So it is really good to see. But you know what we hear in our meetings, like we've had some meetings this summer because of the Black Lives Matter movement, really that pushed it, and you know we kind of changed our regularly scheduled programming and said, okay, we're going to have some discussions on social equity here, and so we had these bi-weekly meetings where we had our regular membership, and then we had a lot of other people just join us, and we talked. We just shared things, and it was very enlightening, actually. You know, because we have a good membership of a very diverse community, including like immigrants, and so you know I might. You know, I know Leah is on the call. She might add to this as well. But one of the things that we were seeing from an immigrant experience, to kind of follow up on Gustavo's, is folks that come here with the hopes of moving forward in this industry. Somehow sometimes they're hampered because of language barriers. A lot of times is they may come here with a degree in architecture or engineering from their particular countries, and they're not recognized. Mm-hmm. And so they may be 30 years old with a doctorate in engineering or whatever, and they have or licensure, and they have to go spend another 5 to 8 years going through that whole process here. And it's for a lot of them, it's disheartening. So I think when we start talking about solutions, I think we want to start talking about some of that. And the other thing that we're also seeing is just culture. There's a lot of differences in how people act. Particularly some immigrant cultures, they may not speak for themselves. It's just because of a culture thing. It's not anything else. So some of those are just some of the things that we're starting to see as a beginning.
Yeah, thank you, Ruwan. Chandra or Gustavo?
Yeah, I mean, when I think about sort of what I'm seeing right now, I mean, we know that Oregon in particular isn't super diverse. When I think about the number of licensed architects in Oregon compared to, how many of those are people of color, women of color, it's pretty shocking. And we've already seen a lot of shocking statistics. But so I looked up. I asked for information about what's the breakdown for AIA, like licensed architects, because that's where I'm coming from, right? And when I got my license and I joined the AIA, not as an associate, as a full licensed member, I checked the box for 2 or more races because my dad is Black and my mom is from Mexico. And so having grown up with my mom, I really identify as Mexican, honestly. But when you look at me, other folks think, oh, she's Black, right? And I'm both. Mm-hmm. But so that's how I initially identified 2 or more races, both very important to me, both cultures very important to me. But when I looked at the list of AIA licensed architects, guess how many Black women are on there? 0. And I was like, oh no. There are 11 women who are 2 or more races. So I immediately went online and changed it because I was like, well, there's 0 women who have said, I'm a Black woman, right? And so it's like, well, I've got to fill it in at least so there's one. And what's really interesting and complex about that is that, you know, we identify how we identify. We're all different. Some people have chosen not to list what their race is, and that is their prerogative, right? And other folks have said, I'm 2 or more races. You don't get to pick which ones. You don't get to be specific about it. I could be anything in that category, right? And so I was starting to realize how important it was to identify very specifically if you're really trying to reach out to a specific community and help, you know, get them more involved or make sure that they have the resources that they need to actually go forward in the AEC industry. And that's just, it was just really surprising to me that that's what I saw when I opened it up, you know, and to be honest, you know, guess how many Black men there are registered in Oregon? There's 2, right? 0 women and 2 men. And, you know, Hispanic or Latino, there's 8 women and 16 men. And like I said, 2 or more races, 11 women and 8 men. Those numbers are all very small. And it's just made me sort of want to be really specific about my culture and my specific experience. And so now, whenever I have the opportunity, I tell people, hey, I'm half Black and half Mexican. Like, recognize this is, I'm not one or the other, and both are important. So I think that's really important when I'm sort of reaching out and talking to students, is to say, this is who I am. Maybe you recognize something in me that's like you. We have some commonalities, but I think it's important to recognize that sort of complexity and not just say that you're one or the other. That's really how I feel like I can show up and be part of a student's network and be really visible, is by saying to all the communities that I've grown up in, that I'm here and I'm successful. I'm on Portland Design Commission. I'm a project director at work. I've joined the new Portland chapter of NOMA in the leadership team to try and bring that forward. So I do everything I can now to be really visible and be really specific in order to make it easier for other folks who are coming up.
Yeah, you know, that's really interesting because it makes me think of a couple of things. One is just how stupid technology is, right? Instead of having you pick multiracial,
right,
like, you could have just picked many boxes and then
right,
you wouldn't have had to go in and change it, right? So there's, right? So there's just even the basics of sort of the arcane nature of how people force us to identify ourselves, right? And the fact that you have to choose, you know, oftentimes we are first defined by our ethnicity or race before our nationality, right? And so I'm a Guatemalan American or a Hispanic American. And like, you don't ever say, oh, that's a white American or that's an American American, right? Because it's that choice that this society, unfortunately, makes us have to choose. And then I think the other piece that you talked about, I think both Amaya and Isaac called it intersectionality, but I think quite frankly, that word is a little overplayed. And I think it's more about the complexity that you talked about, right? And how all of the things that we bring, you know, whether it is our gender identity, our experiences, are the mirrors that we need to provide for kids, right? I remember going into Tony, one of our partners at BRIC, went with Dan to a culinary arts classroom in the Centennial School District. And there were a bunch of Latino girls in the class, and they were walking around as building it and doing typical architecture things. And she was just at that point being the dumb end of the tape. And she heard the girls talking in Spanish. Hey, I think that girl's an architect, you know? And she said it was the most proud she had ever been in this random corner in this random classroom. And, you know, so she went and engaged with them. But talk a little bit, Gustavo, about kind of what you see as our roles, our responsibilities, our jobs in the AEC industry to not only envision a more equitable, just, and humane world, but to actively work to create it.
Yeah, I'll share an anecdote from back in 2013. My first job actually out of college was with ODOT. And the reason why I ended up at ODOT was because of an African-American recruiter that came to campus. Her name was Jenny. She was from Georgia. And it was, quite frankly, very easy to connect with her. And she put me in touch with a Latino engineer that had just moved from LA, and we just met for lunch. And it was for that reason. Had it not been for Jenny, I probably would have not ended up at ODOT. And so when I look at that experience, it's like one of the easiest things that we can do is be the Jennies for the next generation. Because all we have to do is just be available, and the students will gravitate to you. It's clear. And so I know for some of us, especially like in engineering, it can be hard to get out of your box. And, also in our careers, we're very busy. So that is often an excuse. But I think that, being that person for someone, especially during that critical time where, like Ruwan said, a lot of the times it's a first generation student that doesn't have a clear example of what the career trajectory is going to be like. For you to offer that guidance at that critical point in time, you may be the one to set that student up for success, from then on. So I think that's a huge responsibility that we have to take. And that's one of the reasons why I'm, glad that Room for More exists. And some of this work is happening now because it's critical. We hear a lot about kids not making it through college and, falling through the cracks. And it's because the lack of support or just the lack of, role models that they can identify with. So that's one of the big motivations, and one of my goals, moving forward, is just to be present and be that person for them.
Yeah. Hashtag be the Jenny. I think I fell in love with that. So I think that's great. But so I want to pivot a little bit, because I think, we have all started from a place of representation and ensuring that we're being there for students and sort of increasing that pipeline, which I think obviously is the most important, or one of the most important things. But I want to shift us a little bit to talk about our role as designers and creators of space and place and systems for some of you, and talk about kind of what do you see as the role of design in shaping this world and this sort of just society, not necessarily in terms of design, our role as designers in the design industry, but our role as designers with our clients. There's a question on the chat from a local developer that wants to understand kind of what are the actions that developers can take to kind of change the field, right? So what is it that we can do from a design perspective to move the needle forward?
So Karina, I'll take that real quick.
Sure.
Firstly, but I want to address maybe Steve's question there first about how can we change the field to produce more equity. One of the things that we're seeing and we're hearing is one of the main things is networking, right? So with a lot of there's not a lot of MWSB firms. If you look at like engineering, mechanical engineering in particular, and you search for MWSB firms, Karina and all the architects, you guys probably know this. There's not a lot, and it almost gets to me. I got to the point where I thought about forming my own company, and because there's such a lack of, but then you start thinking, well, it's the networking part that really a lot of the minority groups don't have as well, right? It's some of these ingrained networking opportunities, pathways from systemic approaches that's just not there. So that helping with that regard, I think goes a long way. But to shift to your question about, I feel like I'm in one of those, the presidential debates.
I don't see a fly on you, so you're okay.
All right.
Yeah, I just went there.
But to shift to the how we could, designers, I was just coming off of a discussion on social equity and in renewables, right? So one of the arguments that I'm making is that, we do sustainable, healthy buildings. We all design that. We're all into that. But how many of these buildings have we been able to accommodate for disadvantaged communities or communities that don't have the same opportunities that a lot of the other communities do, right? It's not a lot. I mean, I'll be the first to admit that many of the projects, higher efficiency and healthy projects that I've done have not been to some of those communities. So I think as a design community, we really need to come together and find ways to make that happen. There's, find partnerships where we can share some of these resources that some of the developers and owners have. For example, if you take renewable energy, you may have a developer that is, or owner that has access to good funds and they need to get to a net zero energy building, right? But maybe they can share that, the cost of that PV array with a affordable housing unit or a K-12, and they get the benefit of the renewable energy, which reduces their utility costs, but then the developer has the renewable energy credits and they get the net zero label and all of that they were looking for. Sure. So, are there any partnerships that we can do in that regard?
Yeah. What about you, Chandra, in terms of kind of the role of design in shaping the world we want to see?
Yeah, so important. I think the way that we think about how we design, right? The client tells you what it is they're looking for, what is their program, but they rely on us to be the expert, basically on everything, right? And I think what it does is it makes us feel like we're able to make all of these decisions for the project, and the decisions we're making oftentimes are based on assumptions around our own experience and the way that we use space. And so I think we really have to recognize that having a really diverse workplace, a diverse studio, means that you have other perspectives. People have grown up in a different way, understand cultures in a different way, understand spaces and how they're used in a different way. And if you don't have that, you have to work so much harder to really listen to the client about exactly how they use space. And you have to ask them so many more questions about what they do day to day, whether it's a school or a home or an office, right? And how that impacts or how it could impact the spaces that they're in. We're just not doing that yet, right? Because we think that we know what makes a good office space. It's light and it's views and it's natural materials. And yes, those are things that are common to all good spaces, right? But there's a lot of nuance to design that I think we're simply missing right now. And it's really important for everyone to sort of take a step back and recognize, you know what, I'm not an expert in this particular culture, and the spaces that I'm designing for them may not be quite right, and you need to really make an effort to reach out more. And one thing that we do in our office is create a set of design principles for every project, which is really common to architecture firms, right? You do this so that you can check back as the design progresses and make sure that it's meeting the project goals. And it's also a way to build consensus, right? And so you need to have a group of people that that you're building consensus with to say that, yes, this is doing what it should. But you also have to have a good enough relationship with them so that they trust you, that they are able to tell you when you're doing it wrong, when this is not the kind of space that you want, or, for whatever reason, the kitchen needs to be at the back side of the building and it needs to open up because 75% of the time we'd rather be outside. There's a lot of different things we can do, and I think it's a really big deal, and it's going to be really hard for some firms to tackle that and to admit that they're not the expert in everything.
Yeah, that's great. It's interesting because we're talking about both sides of this, right? That it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing in the sense that we won't get more diverse spaces until we have more diverse experience designing those spaces, which means the diverse voices in our firms, all of that. But then by the same token, we need to be getting to more diverse spaces more quickly. So how do we do that? And, one of the tools that we've been leveraging is critical race theory as a really big driver of process, because oftentimes it isn't, yes, we are typically, at least in the public school arena, you aren't designing for a particular culture. You are designing on what I'm going to call the melanin spectrum, right? Yeah. Kind of all across our cultures. And yet in almost every case, the groups that we're talking to don't reflect even the percentages of the cultures in that school, right? It is the leaders of the ASB, when you're the Associated Student Body or leadership classes. It is the people who the principals pick or the school district picks, and people that come and volunteer their time. Well, I can tell you that Latino parents that are working 2 jobs, that are trying to raise 4 kids, they're not going to volunteer to come be a parent on a public school design committee. Right. And so what processes can we as designers put into place to ensure that we're getting the right voices in the room and asking the right types of questions to move us forward, so that way we can build that tapestry of stories that starts to allow us to create design principles that are more grounded in who they're serving. Yeah. Who wants to take that one up?
I mean, just my recent experience on a few projects, I'm thinking about kind of what we're doing now, and we're learning how to do this, right? So we're recognizing that we have a community advisory committee on a project, and it's for an affordable housing development, right? That's surrounded by single family homes. So we've put together this community advisory committee. It's residents, it's neighbors, it's people who provide services, right? But the fact is that when you're in a room, oftentimes those residents, you know, aren't going to speak up. They're not going to speak over someone who's there providing services because they recognize them, right? So you have to not only just engage them, but you have to engage them in different ways. And, you know, make a group that's only residents so that they feel a little bit more comfortable. And there's other things that we've been doing to get people involved, especially in this virtual environment. You know, what they used to do for community meetings was provide dinner and childcare and say, come on out, we'll take care of the kids. You can participate in this design charrette and kind of think about what's coming. But now virtually, they decided to do Grubhub this time, which was awesome because they were able to like get people to come out, you know, come pick up their dinner and then go back home and be part of this charrette. And so it's been really nice, but thinking about sort of the time constraint, I think is a really big deal. Like if you are working, you don't necessarily have time for this. It's the same thing that happens in design commission. You know, there are things happening in your neighborhood that you don't get a chance to talk about, voice your opinions about, because those meetings are happening when you are working, when you are busy, right? And so I've been reaching out to students when I talk to them in Your Street, Your Voice, and saying like, I want to hear from you in design commission. I want to hear from your mom. Even if you can't come, you can, you know, write an email that says what you feel about and send it to us and we'll read it into the record. Like there's lots of different ways to start to engage people, but I think it really is a learning process of trying a bunch of different things to reach people in different ways so that you actually get the information that's coming directly from them in sort of a less inhibited way, because there's sort of like social dynamics are a big deal, you know, people not wanting to talk over one another, which I think Ruwan, you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. That's actually interesting in terms of kind of the way the pandemic has affected it, because I'm actually seeing sort of greater levels of engagement, right? Mm-hmm. People are more willing to be on a chat like this and either verbally say their input or put it in a chat. Yeah. So as much as it's been a pain in the ass and I no longer want to see people's faces of the Brady Bunch on my screen, I want very badly to be back in front of people, but it also is showing us the power of breaking down kind of the power structure, which I think Zoom does in a certain way, right? Yeah. What about you guys, Gustavo and Ruwan? What do you guys see as kind of the ways in which we as designers can, what does it even mean? What is an inclusive space in your mind?
Yeah, one thing, going back to just providing that lens that we talked about, I think individually it's important that we understand that we're not just this mechanical engineer and I'm just here to design your heating and cooling system, but that we bring a lot more to the table. And that goes for everyone, you know, even the people that we're working with, our clients, where traditionally they think, oh, well, this guy's going to design our ducts and he's going to get the cooling and heating into our classrooms. but important for them to realize that we too were students once, and we too went through that experience. And that's something that I tell a lot of people that I come across is like the education system, unless your family has, vast resources, you and your children are very likely to be a product of that. So why not, put yourself in those shoes, whether it was when you went through it or the experience that you want your children to go through in a public space like a school, and kind of use that lens, and also our experiences that we carry, and it's true in terms of like where school districts are and leadership. They too are trying to evolve, but the reality is that we're we're quite a bit behind where I think we should be, especially in these communities where, like Karina was sharing, highly diverse, multiple languages, students of color from different places, like traditionally, when people thought, oh, you're Latino or you're Mexican immigrant. Well, now we have like Central American immigrants, we have indigenous immigrants. How do we sustain those cultures? Because I think that's part of a quality education, is for these students to be sustained throughout their years in school. So that's, one way. And I think also the schools there's a lot of research coming up with like cultural responsive teaching, culturally sustaining teaching. So as designers also like staying up to date with what the schools are trying to do and what's being studied and proven to be effective with diverse schools and diverse student bodies.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as designers, if we're not lifelong learners, I don't know what we're doing in this industry, right? So it's kind of that constant need to ensure that you're aware of what's happening is really important. One other question that I have for you guys is really, what does it look like to participate both as a person of color, as BIPOC community member, but also as an ally, right? I mean, Chandra, you talked about, having folks come in and make a statement to the design commission. I mean, I will tell you personally, I have a request. Anytime you see any advertisement for your local school or school district asking for people to sit on their design committees, it doesn't take that much time, I promise you. And it's quite frankly a lot of fun. Get involved. That is the best way you could get involved. So what are other ideas folks have about how either BIPOC community members or allies can help advance the DEI and just racial equity, social justice agenda from just a private citizen interacting with the design world?
That's a good question. I mean, I always think of things on a personal level instead of sort of this grander scale of like, how can I create this network where everyone's reaching out to people? I always think like, how many people can I personally reach out to? How many people can I personally connect with, make a connection, say that I'm here if you want something. And, the things I'm imagining are like, like I said, in design commission, I literally have seen no architects or developers of color in that room since I've been on the commission. And I've only seen, a handful of residents of color who are coming to talk about, their concerns about a project when it comes in, right? And I know because I get super excited when I see them and I'm like, yes, I'm so glad they're here. I don't know what got them here, but I'm so glad they're here, which is why, I just say, I kind of take the personal tact and just say, are you interested in this at all? Do you have any thoughts about it that you would like me to convey, to anyone that I might be able to? And that's sort of how I've been thinking about it. And obviously at some point that is it requires more time than any one of us really has to reach out individually, which I think is why, Room for More and Your Street, Your Voice and NOMA and all of these organizations that we're involved in are so important, because I think the more visible we all are, then it allows people to actually see that something is happening. There are people who look like them, who may have come from a similar community, and it makes it more comfortable for folks to be able to reach out. But I still think that there's a lot of work to do in actually setting up the structures that make that easier, right? Like, so if I'm trying to get people to participate in design commission and to testify, you know, the thinking about like how to reach out to so many people at once is really like, well, can we go and make sure that, you know, we're putting a piece of paper on everyone's door in this neighborhood? It's not just mailed to them, it's tacked to the door. In fact, the city of Portland only recently started mailing land use notifications to renters. It used to only be homeowners.
Yeah.
I don't own a home. I'm a perfectly successful person living in this neighborhood, and I would not get a land use notification sent to me at my home. It was only for homeowners. And I was appalled by that. And I was like, well, great change. Now we're sending it to everyone. But what's the next step after that to make sure that people can know what's happening in the community and get involved, besides the one poster, you know, that they put up at the actual site that you might not ever go by, right?
That's great. What about you, Gustavo or Ruwan? What do you think? I mean, I think, and do it from the perspective if you can. I mean, obviously we're all coming at this as people of a BIPOC community, but you know, especially I see on this call, I see it even in Room for More and the other groups, there are great allies outside of our BIPOC community that are trying to help us advance these initiatives forward. So what do you see as participants? What can allies do to bring issues to bear in their communities?
You know, I can talk about that in terms of my experience at our corporate level. Sure. You know, I'm leading the PE's JEDI, Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee, and so I've actually dealt with this, and it's been very insightful actually. So you know, we have like we have about 70 people in the group. So I instead of calling it a committee, I'm calling it a community because it is what it is, right? And it's a very diverse community of BIPOC and all kinds of people, including allies. And we went through some iterations of, where we have these community meetings of 80 or 60 to 80 people, and there are some groups that are not comfortable talking in that environment. And then there are folks that talk a lot, you know, that's just how they are, and they have ideas. And so we went through this process of, hey, you know, talking to people and say, hey, you know, if you have a lot of ideas, but you also recognize that there are other folks in the room that need to maybe share their voice, and if you recognize that and allow room for that, we tried to do that. But in the end, I think what we needed to do was break apart into smaller groups. And breaking apart into smaller groups of 10 to 15 people that are concentrated, like we have a BIPOC group. We have, you know, 3 BIPOC groups for each office, and we have a queer group, and we have all these different groups. And it becomes, as well as this, I want to call it an ally group, but it's a anti-racism club is what it is, but it's really an ally group where people can, that are focused on helping the communities, but they're allies, they can talk about things and then move it back forward into the larger community and talk within that larger community. So all these smaller groups, like the BIPOC group, and Gustavo's leading the Portland BIPOC group, right? And so it's been great where, you know, you can talk about anything in that smaller group where you might not be comfortable talking about in a larger group, but then the bigger issues that come out of those smaller groups can come to the larger group and then to the leadership team where we can start getting those initiatives going. And so it's helping folk have those focused groups and really, and then whatever is kind of bubbling up from those groups come forward is the best way that I've been able to handle it, even for the allies.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because one of the key tenets of CRT, critical race theory, is that just what you're talking about. They're called affinity groups, where, you know, you often get pushback because people are saying, oh, well, you're excluding other people, right? Like you're having a group that's just BIPOC or just allies, and people are feeling excluded. But if you're not working in those affinity groups to, first of all, build trust and feel like you can say things in a BIPOC only group that you can't say, or that most people, I can say anything in any group because that's just my big old loud ass mouth, but a lot of people don't, right? They just don't have that level of comfort. But, you know, talk a little bit, Gustavo, kind of about the role of affinity groups and the importance of ensuring that everyone has a safe place to make their claim.
First off, I think affinity groups or these subgroups happen organically. When I moved to Seattle, I was like the only Latino there, and as soon as they hired another one, I'm like, hey, there's two of us now, let's go have lunch, you know. And then we hired some more African American engineers, and we formed our own group because as humans we want to have community. Yeah, it's been great having that, and then now just making it more official and being recognized as, hey, you are here and you deserve a voice too. That has been very gratifying, and just, you know, I look forward to like growing that. But again, like you're all saying, it has to be based on trust, and it can't be superficial. And so that's the issue we run into a lot when, you know, with large groups or people who we can't really relate to in certain, you know, experiences, which happens a lot with allies. It's just, I don't know, it's better to keep it that way for now. And then also with the idea that we will sustain each other within the group, which is key, and also advocate on a corporate level for each other and, you know, the ideas that we have. Another thing, that kind of an issue I've ran into with allies, is they want to act now and solve the problem. And kind of my advice for that is, you know, these are centuries of oppression, and you can't just like think that overnight you're gonna create this policy, or you're gonna, you know, wear a badge and say we're all allies and the problem is gonna go away. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of just, you know, and everyone's experience is gonna be different. So internalized racism, just there's a lot there for us to say that we're gonna overturn it in the next year. And so it's important for allies to be respectful that this is a long haul. It's gonna take time, and you can't expect for, you know, leaders of color to pop out of nowhere when the norm has not been that. You know, the norm has not been to give a person of color a leadership position. So, but they can begin to create that space, and, you know, we can begin to build the trust. So I think patience and understanding is key from allies.
Totally. And I think I'll give it right back to you, Ruwan, but an acknowledgement and an understanding that communities of color right now are tired, right? They are tired. They are bone weary of the fight. And so there are times where we don't have the energy to put into it, and we need somebody else to lace up their shoes to be in the marathon with us, because you're exactly right. It isn't a sprint. You were going to say something, Ruwan?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add to that, and that's the experience that we had in our Jedi community too, where we started out, and you know, and there were folks that really wanted to jump into action, and let's put the social media out here, and let's do this here, and then I know a lot of the BIPOC folks were like, whoa, you know, slow down, dude. You know, it's like, we gotta, there's a lot of issues here. We need to talk about it. And it's not something that you just go do, right? And it's, so, I think relate to what Gustavo just said, and we experienced that. On the flip side of that, you know, I've talked about within our committee is, you know, assuming good intent, right? And that I repeat that at every meeting, you know, especially to the BIPOC folks is, you know, when you have to assume that if you have white allies that are at these meetings, they're or any ally really, but allies that are here, they're you know, there because they want to help. So sometimes it may be frustrating, but you know, assume that there's good intent. Be patient with each other. Sometimes educate, but there is a lot of energy and a lot of wanting to do things from that side, from the ally side, and that energy is, I mean, we need it. So we definitely, you know, want to take advantage of that and work together.
Yeah, that's great. I want to invite, I mean, we still have, we haven't gotten rid of everybody, so that's good. We still have like 44 people hanging on. So anybody that has any questions, by all means, that we want to open this up. This isn't just a four-way discussion, but we want to be sure that we're answering your needs as well. But you know, one of the things as you guys were talking while we wait for anyone to chime in is, you know, as much as I am a firm believer in the role of affinity groups, I do worry a little bit about if we're only in affinity groups, then we start to create those silos again, that de facto segregation of ideas, right? And so what are some ways that, I mean, Chandra, talk about it from a design thinking perspective. You know, we as architects, more than anything, we're facilitators, right? And so talk a little bit about, if you can, some of the ways that you think that we as designers can facilitate conversations that are across affinity groups, that start to bring the disparate ideas and experiences together in a way that leads to greater understanding and then therefore greater consensus. No pressure.
I know it's a real big question. I'm trying to think about like specific examples, and really when I'm thinking about it, it's your discussion in the room is really about sharing things about yourselves and your experience so that you can find where there are some commonalities and then highlight kind of what differences are as well. Because I'm thinking about, when I'm thinking about like, oh, floor plan and what are the qualities of these different spaces, right? There always have to be spaces in a building that are for small groups, different kind of work, and I'm imagining those as affinity groups, and then bigger spaces where everyone's coming together, right? You have to be able to accommodate and design for both of those because very different work, very different activities happen in both of those spaces, and that's kind of how I'm thinking of affinity groups and how you're bringing everyone together. And I think part of that is, you know, it goes back to what I was saying about being, you know, both Black and Mexican, is that if I'm able to express that to a room full of people, there are people in here who could identify with either, right? But if they see I'm not just one thing, then that sort of starts to build a little bit of trust. And I think it's the same thing when you're designing and you're thinking about different groups who are going to be in the same space together, but maybe don't have the same needs. It's recognizing sort of what the differences and what the commonalities are so that you make space for both of them. You make space for as many of them as you possibly can. And that means that, you know, those spaces aren't so specialized that only one group really wants to use them. But I think it's really trying to like, and maybe that sounds like it's like spreading the peanut butter too thin, you know, to try and do everything. But I think you really do have to make an effort to understand everyone in the room or everyone who's going to be using the building and make spaces that are specific to them. But make them understand that, you know, the space where we're all together maybe is the biggest and the nicest and the one that people want to spend the most time in, right? But I think just recognition of that complexity is what's important, and it's what we have to do kind of every day in our programming. I mean, we have to do it. We don't necessarily do it now, but that's what we need to be doing, in my opinion, in order to make these spaces feel good for everyone who's using them, regardless of your culture or spaces that are specific to your community culture.
And as you were talking, I was thinking about it both as the physical space, but then also as sort of the metaphorical space, right? Because I think we as architects we're typically given a design problem to solve, And at least in the design of schools, one of the things that we do is we say, we're not going to take your problem that you're giving us. We're going to go and poke around and see what the real problem is, right? And so it's in deconstructing the problem that you really get to the stories that help shape a new direction. Maybe it isn't spreading the peanut butter because everyone wants jelly, right? And thinking about it in that way. What about from a sort of systems perspective? I mean, the way you design, Gustavo and Ruwan, obviously, I mean, we can get into a conversation about the difference between architects and engineers, talk about differences, right, and diversity, but how do you guys see, you know, when you guys are the lead, or when you guys are doing design charrettes, sustainability charrettes, system conversations, how do you see the role of diversity in those conversations? And it's okay if you say no, you know what, honestly, we don't see it in the conversations, but I just thought it was an interesting question because I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, Gustavo, I don't know if you, I'll take it.
I'll let Ruwan take this one. He has more experience there.
Okay. No, I think, you know, we have, you know, when we have those charrettes and we're talking about energy, it's easy to just think about energy, right? And energy, you know, net zero energy, whatever. And sometimes you do lose sight of the fact that, you know, who's actually using this building, right?
People, right?
It's people, right? And exactly. So, you know, when we've designed like passive schools, for example, you know, we've designed I've designed a passive school for a private school, and I've done it for a public school that's, you know, Title I, right? So there are different needs that come back from the owner and the steering committees, and it's really important to think about that. And because, well, one, I touched on earlier about the equity in this, right? You want to be able to provide, you know, I'm really passionate about wanting to provide these great buildings to those communities as well. So how do you accomplish that? But, you know, knowing that they may not have the resources to necessarily do what you're recommending. So is there anything, are there optimizations that we can do within the design to get there, to give them what they need in terms of a healthy and highly performing building, but maybe not in others? Like maybe the finishes don't have to be as great. Maybe we pull back on some of the finishes. I know you're laughing, you're smiling.
Chandra and I are like, hey,
don't
you can shrink your units before you take our finishes, friend.
These are stone.
I mean, no, seriously. Yeah, right. So
where you have the biggest impact, right?
Where you have it's you want a healthy building, good air quality, good lighting where students and teachers can perform well. And you want efficient building so the district can save energy in the long run. Right. So, yeah, how can you achieve that? Sometimes it is through finishes. Sorry.
Yeah. No.
One comment.
Go ahead, Gustavo.
Just a quick comment that I've noticed with energy studies and just focusing on energy is the metric that we use for energy is energy use intensity, which is based on square footage. Which can be misleading sometimes. A metric that I've been working with lately is energy per person, because that, again, going back to who are we designing for, it's people. You can have a huge building unoccupied and it's going to be the most efficient because no one's using it. But again, centering the occupants, and that one, I think that that metric came out of a passive house design. It's just going back to like, okay, you know, let's measure the amount of energy per person. And of course, square footage and occupants is related, but it just changes the perspective from like per square foot to like each person consumes this amount of energy. I think it's in some ways, a better way to see how the energy is going into the occupants in a building.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, we'll wrap up here in a minute. But I think it is as simple as it could be as simple as changing the vocabulary. You know, one of the conversations we have in the educational side is that it's a game changer in schools for people to stop. Whenever you talk to teachers, oftentimes they'll tell you, I teach math, I teach second grade, I teach science. No, you don't. You teach second graders, you teach kindergartners, you teach, you know, sophomore science. Yes, you have a focus. And I think we as designers do that all the time. Like people will, until recently, people would ask me, what do you do? And I say, I design, you know, schools. And that's not true. I design for learners of all kinds. And it's just that shift that gets you to think about who's really at the center of what we're doing. And to me, when we look at that through empathy, we have to lead to better, equitable, just, and humane spaces, because we're no longer forgetting that the person is the most important, regardless of what race, what gender, what ethnicity that person has. So we are up against time. I know, Riley, that you want to put the PowerPoint back on, and we can plug the next panel, let you do that. But thank you, Ruwan. Thank you, Gustavo, Chandra, for a great discussion. One that I think could have gone on for a long time. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks, Karina.
Yeah, thank you.
That was fabulous. Thank you guys so much. I wrote at least 3 pages of notes, so I really appreciate it. Like Karina said, thank you, Karina, Ruwan, Gustavo, Chandra. I mean, just you excelled beyond what I could ever hope for. I learned so much today. We do have a third panel where we're going to try and bring all of the stuff we've learned in the last 2 panels together. I hope you guys can join us for that one. It's the same log or the same sign up as you used for this event. And other than that, feel free to say thank you, hop on, whatever you'd like to do. We'll just keep this open for a minute. Lots of thank yous in the chat.
Yeah, that was fun. Thank you,
That was
Riley.
fun.
And thank you, Karina, for moderating. That's a good conversation.
It was.
Yeah,
We can
thank
really
you.
go off on tangents and talk forever about kind of any one of these things based on just our experience. We could be here all day, but
Yeah.
it's really fun.
I know I really didn't want to cut it off.
When we recently started talking about kind of that tapestry of stories, like that just stuck with me, because that's what everything is, right? It's about these conversations and how those conversations then shape into one another and weave together. It's why I love architecture, because it's about that weaving, right?
Yes. Fun for people, and I think it's really helpful to have lots of conversations that are casual like this, and people can join and just listen in, because that makes it a lot easier for everyone else to have these same kind of conversations outside in their own circles that we're not a part of, and just share a little bit of that experience, so you kind of hear another perspective and hear another story, and that's really powerful.
Yep.
All right, I will end this. Have a lovely day, everybody.
You too.
Thank you.
See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks for organizing everything, Riley.
Yeah, thank you.